after Chicago, you appeared in the next year, in 2003, in two very good, very different films. First, Down with Love, which was sort of a play on the Rock Hudson, Doris Day comedies of the late 50s and early 60s. That was, I think it's underappreciated. People might want to check that out again.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then came a film that I think, you know, the reception, the response to your performance was as great as probably any up until Judy, where everybody went nuts for you as Ruby Thews, a woman who sort of bursts onto the scene and takes over the story in Cold Mountain, the Civil War set story, directed by the late Anthony Minghella. And I just wonder if you can share, you actually had quite a history with that material, and so the fact that it ended up the way it did was kind of incredible.
Yeah, I kind of stalked that project for quite some years. A boyfriend of mine at the time, his parents are from the Carolinas, and they were friends with Charles Frazier. And they got the galleys and sent them to my boyfriend at the time, who was a young filmmaker. And they wanted to acquire the rights, and we were going to make this movie. We were going to make this movie called Mountain. And Newsweek came out with a review of the book. And by Monday morning, it was $1 million or something like that, or, you know, it was not going to happen for us. But I heard that the studio had acquired it for Anthony Minghella to develop. And at that time, he was going to make The Talented Mr. Ripley, but he hadn't written it yet. So he's going to write it, and then he's going to direct it. He's going to, you know. So it was quite a process. And sometime in that mix of things, I was asked by Cameron Crowe to go to England to the Empire Awards because he was given an Empire Award. He couldn't go. He asked me to accept it for him. So I went. And after the awards, this sweet man came over. And you know, Anthony had a very specific walk. His arms were always down by his side. He didn't do a whole lot of swinging. They were just down here by his side. And he walked over to me like that. And says, "You're Renee. I heard you like Cold Mountain." And I said, "Yes. Nice to meet you." And I left. But he did call me a couple of years later. I guess it was maybe 5 years. Whenever I would speak to John, I would say, "Okay, but is that going to get in the way of Cold Mountain?" Because, you know, it's funny. It's funny how you wish on something hard enough, you just never know.
Yeah. And then, was there something about that character in particular? I mean, I think that when you were initially thinking of it, were you imagining yourself as Ruby?
Yes, because my understanding of, well, no, as Ada initially, and it was Anthony's idea to suggest Ruby, which was thrilling to me. The way that he described her, I thought, oh, right, I understand.
Yeah. She just bursts onto the scene, literally, I think breaking a chicken's neck right away. Makes quite an entrance. One of the things that I think is worth thinking about for people and here, and then it's going to come up in a different context in a few minutes, is just how many movies with really high quality performances you were pumping out year after year after year after year. So let's just quickly review. 2001, White Oleander and Bridget Jones's Diary. 2002, Chicago. 2003, Down with Love and Cold Mountain. 2004, Returning to Bridget Jones and Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason. 2005, Mae Braddock, wife of Russell Crowe's Benjamin Braddock, in one of the great boxing movies, Cinderella Man, for Ron Howard. Followed by 2006, Beatrix Potter and Chris Noonan's Miss Potter. Then for George Clooney, in his movie that he directed, Leatherheads. These are essentially back to back to back to back to back. Now that comes with a kind of price as well, which we'll talk about. But I mean, I guess, can you just share at the time, was it you're getting flooded with so many great opportunities? Did you just, rather than saying, hey, let's pace myself and you just have to jump at something like a Mae Braddock or Miss Potter, you got to do it. You can't say no. right? It's just too good, the material. What I'm saying is, the reason that I know you took a break shortly thereafter, you've said, was because it was just nonstop, right? So I guess if you can talk about just that period when it was back to back to back to back to back.
Well, I wouldn't say that I took a break because it was nonstop. It was that I had left a few very important things out of the equation, like my health. And I didn't realize it at the time. It took me a while to recognize that the chaos that I was living on the inside was starting to show on the outside. And I needed to step back for a minute and recalibrate. And it didn't really matter at a certain point what the result of that decision would look like in my life. It was essential. And like anybody who has a job, you don't sort of complain about the amount of work that comes your way. This is your job and it's your profession, it's what you do for a living. And if we're lucky enough to do what we love for a living, then you certainly don't complain. It's thrilling, it's rewarding. The bigger the challenge, the bigger the reward. And in a creative experience, a creative life, there's very little reason to say no to things that teach you something, that help you to grow, that change your life perspective. And that's what I was greedy for. And when it kept arriving in these different, I guess, in these different projects, I couldn't find a good reason not to do them. I wasn't married, I don't have children, and it felt like that it was the inevitable right thing to do, to join in on these collaborations that bring me so much joy. But I also didn't recognize that I didn't really have I didn't have boundaries. Because I felt such gratitude for the opportunity to participate in these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, once in a lifetime that happened repeatedly. I didn't feel that I could say, "You're right, it's spoiled rotten, it really was." I could say no. Why would I say no if you asked if I could fly from Romania to Canada to Los Angeles to New York to Canada to Romania in 3 days? Why wouldn't I do that? Of course I'll do that for you. I feel so lucky to be part of those projects. Of course I'll do that.
And then having to sell, people forget, it's not just the making of it. Each one of them then has to be promoted and sold and all of that. So, I mean, it got to the point where you've said a lot of your 30s is just a blur, right?
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of my 30s. I have a lot of friends who say, "Oh, remember when we," and I don't, because I think it's it's a stress thing where you're holding your breath to get through the next. And my brain was always full of logistics and responsibilities and how I would keep my professional promises.
Where did you actually live during that time?
Nowhere.
Let's take a look at Renee in Cold Mountain, Cinderella Man, and Miss Potter.